Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of On the Spot. I am your host, Ronnie Daniel. This evening, this afternoon, we have a very special guest with me. He is no other than the Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mr. Carlos Williams.
James.
Mr. Carlos James, I beg your pardon. When we come back, we will get into our conversation with the Speaker of the House of Assembly. At this point, we wish to acknowledge our sponsorship, all our sponsors, ANN News Network, ITFX Solutions, and of course the proprietors of Chill Spot, Lance and Maffon Oliver. When we come back, we will hear a little bit more about our special guest, and later on we will take your questions and your comments. Let's take our first break. Welcome back to On the Spot with your host, Ronnie Daniel. My special guest this afternoon is no other than Mr. Carlos James, who is the Speaker of the House of Assembly. Carlos, welcome to On the Spot, and thank you for consenting to be a part of this very important discussion that we're about to have.
Thank you for having me. Ronnie, it's a pleasure to be here. Let me say good afternoon to the viewers of ANN News Network, a very growing and developing platform, and I'm happy to be here to share with the viewers of this program.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Carlos, before we go into the professional life, I know you as Carlos, the journalist, and then thereafter you went off. But tell us a little bit about your own background. I know you're a man from North Leeward, Chumuka to be precise. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and later on we will go into Carlos, the professional, and of course the Speaker of the House of Assembly.
Well, you notice I'm smiling when you mention I'm a North Leeward man. And you mentioned I'm from Chumuka. I mean, it's one of the proudest things for me to say I'm a Chumuka man, a North Leeward man. I'm from the bowels of the North Leeward constituency, where I've spent most of my life before venturing off to in my professional capacity, both here in St. Vincent and abroad. I grew up in Chumuka, attended school in Chumuka, came out of what a lot of persons would not have known as the Chumuka Uprising. I was a student then in 1995, I believe, when a lot of the villagers came out and they protested the closure of a primary school in the area. And I was one of the young persons on the street there in Chumuka. Beside me was a 12-year-old boy by the name of Devon Samuel, who was arrested at the time. And these things, very often when persons try to identify with who you are and where you're from, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that experience and the concrete jungle of Chumuka, where I grew up and it came out from, and it developed into the individual I am here today. My love for the people of North Leeward is well known. That's where I spent all of my childhood, and you know, I have very fond memories of my upbringing with my grandparents in Chumuka, a place I love very dearly and to my heart.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about the protest. I think I was in Jamaica during that year, but if I'm not mistaken, I followed that event with some interest. I think the issue at the time was there were some issues, either if my mind serves me right, with the physical structure. I know at that time there was a general national clamor for changes in our education system. So I know that there was and later on that manifested in 1999, 2000 into 2001. But we'll talk about that a little later. But tell us precisely, as a youngster, what went through your mind in terms of protests of that nature, and the sort of impact?
It was one of the most amazing things really to observe in that time. It was my first experience of struggle, my first experience of activism. And I recall as a student, the Minister of Education at the time, I believe it was John Horn, he came to Trumuka for a meeting with the then parliamentary representative, which was Alpen Allen, and had a meeting with the PTA of the school. And by then the school was a wooden structure, had gone through maybe 2 generations, 2 or 3 generations. It was deemed unsafe. I mean, incidentally, just like the Parliament building, I'm sure we'll get to that at some point in the conversation. But it was deemed unsafe and not habitable for use. And rather than taking the decision to construct a new school at the time, the decision was to merge the Trumuka Secondary and the Petitbell Secondary, and to relocate the primary school at Trumuka at the secondary school. And villagers felt that the education was part of the institution of what Trumuka was at the time. And they wanted both schools to remain. The government at the time was adamant that they were closing these schools. And it was important for villagers to take that position to go out onto the streets and to protest. As a young boy then, I was immersed into that struggle. I mean, how can we at the time, emerging post-colonial economy, the developments in Vincent, we're looking to shut schools as opposed to expand. And that was my first brush with the struggle. We had incidentally blocked the roads, and I believe nationally, a few years after, it culminated into a larger national movement, protest and upheaval. But we started it in Trumuka, and we said, the people, we are going to make that decision, that determination to chart our way forward. We are going to be the ones to make that determination as to whether or not the schools remain. And we were adamant that no vehicle access to North Leeward and no vehicle access out. And 9 persons, I recall at the time, were arrested, including a 12-year-old boy who was standing, as I said earlier, incidentally right next to me. Now, you can imagine I was maybe just a few years younger than he was, but the psychological impact. Officers with guns, and back then it was the Special Services Unit, we call it the Mangoose Gang, and it was Leroy Lachman, and just being there in that moment, it has that psychological scar on my mind. It still today affects me, and it really drove me into activism and drove me into transforming me into the person, as I said earlier, that I am today. Just that very incident has caused, and has really, though we had those challenges, it really was a blessing in disguise, because it created the Carlos James that is before you here.
Okay. I suppose our audience would be curious to know what is it that motivates you I guess you're a young professional. I don't think you're 40 yet. So you have some energy, you have the world before you, so to speak. What really motivates you? You're entering into, well, you have, at your age, I will say that the achievements have been remarkable thus far. Speaker of the House of Assembly, prior to that, Deputy Speaker, Senator, and I know that you're doing some work in your constituency, which we'll talk about later. But what really motivates you as a young professional who have reached such attainments?
From a very early period of my professional life, I was one of the critics who would always offer constructive criticism, and I would say, we can do this a lot better. And why don't we find a better way of improving this or doing that? And having over the years developed a particular set of skill sets and attributes, it was no time for me not to sit on the sidelines and say, why isn't this being done, or why isn't that, and how can we improve this? It's time to get involved. And I had that conversation with myself, and I said, let me get involved into a process of change, let me get involved into a process of development and advancement in service to the people. And fundamentally what drives me is my commitment to serve in a broader capacity across St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to serve my country. And I'm very disciplined, I'm very driven when it comes to that. I may have a very jovial side, outside of the suit and the shirt, but when it comes to the advancement of people, I do not sleep. A moment in time does not pass when I'm not thinking about how can I improve the lives of people, particularly in North Leeward, but from a national standpoint, and service and continued service to the people and to the advancement of St. Vincent and Grenadines.
Okay, all right. So let's move a little bit now into your professional life. You made a crossover from Carlos, the journalist, writer, into law. I suppose to our audience would be curious as to why you made such a move, and you did answer partly in your last concluding statement, but expand it a little bit. It's not often that young people get into politics at that level. Of course, yes, our young people gravitate to the grassroots work. They will mobilize through the various youth movements, civil society and so on, but not necessarily politics or national service. So tell us why the transition from the journalist to law and now into national service in the realm of politics.
Right. So my journalism career, not a lot of persons might be aware of that, and then you mentioned it. It's still my first love. I started as a young journalist into journalism under the guidance of a very important lady who has since passed, Norma Keyser. Played a very instrumental role in my life, my earlier years as a young professional. I think when I started at the Socialite newspaper, I wasn't even perhaps at the age to be paying NS, and I started at a very young age and getting involved in immersing myself, and it to me it was perhaps the biggest impact on my life, because it was a university, just learning and observing, following world leaders, developments. Then it was the era of World Trade Organization and the Doha Development Round, Pascal Lamy, and the changing of the guard with CARICOM states and preferential trading arrangements. I was immersed in all of these very developmental aspects of our own St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has been a part of that in the ACP countries and so on. And I learned a lot, more than you would probably learn at a university. And these days I don't think a lot of people read often and as much as they need to. And I was, across the board where that's world affairs and global issues. And it was my passion, was my first love, journalism. Incidentally, persons might not have known I'm an award-winning journalist as well, a Pan-American Health Award for Excellence in Health Journalism, on 2 pieces I did while at the University of the West Indies at Carimac, where I did some formal training in journalism. I submitted those pieces to the PAHO, and they got the nod for an award for excellence in health journalism. Perhaps one of the very few Vincentians who would have gone on to the Commonwealth Secretariat, where I spent some time working in the Communications and Public Affairs Division, the Office of the Secretary General. Then I think it was Don McKinnon. So I spent some time and gradually moved into a stage of personal development and advancement, as well as serving as a journalist. And I took the decision to after going off to London, where I was at the Commonwealth, I returned to London to pursue law. I wanted to challenge myself a bit more, having done journalism in St. Vincent, at the Caribbean Media Corporation. I was one of the regional correspondents here in St. Vincent for the online CMC News. To me, I felt the drive and the need to do a bit more in terms of my personal development and professional development, and I wanted to do law. Law was something I was passionate about as well, and then as a childhood dream. And I went off to London, studied law, and came back to St. Vincent. And you know, and the conscious awakening, I think I found myself in London, where one day I was off going in the north of England on a train, and my childhood, my growth and development, it came flashing back at me. And my grandmother came to my mind, a lady who I love and cherish very much, is now deceased, but I grew up with her. And then a lot of the things that she imparted in me as a young person, suddenly it made sense. And I think I found myself, I returned home to St. Vincent, and I said, I had the chance of continuing at the Commonwealth. Even after doing law, I did a master's, I did the bar program, and then did a master's in law, and continued at the Commonwealth in a consultative capacity in the Communications and Public Affairs Division. But you know, you spend so much money studying law. I said, listen, I'm going home to practice. I then had a young daughter at the time, and I said, I'm going home to St. Vincent. And I made the decision to return to St. Vincent and immerse myself into my practice. I spent, this year would be 10 years since I've been practicing. And then I had the natural incline and the calling to serve greater than just being a lawyer or a professional. And then I wanted to get involved in community service, and here I am.
You are listening to another edition of On the Spot. I am your host, Ronnie Daniel, and we are having a conversation with the Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mr. Carlos James. When we come back, we will take some of your questions and comments, and of course, we will ask some of the harder questions. We'll be right back. Welcome back to On the Spot. I am your host, Ronnie Daniel, and with me in studio is no other than the Speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Carlos James. We will take your questions and comments, and we will continue to ask our guest some very important questions as he takes up his new role as Speaker of the House of Assembly, and also as this country prepares to host another, general elections, and we will talk a little bit about that. Carlos, you, as I alluded to earlier, you have done, by all intents and purposes, by any means, you have achieved a lot in such a short space of time, and you ought to be congratulated for that. You have done yourself proud, your nation, your family, and your daughter. And you are now serving in a very important capacity. And I want to just throw a few questions to you before I get into the questions from our audience. So you are well prepared for the position as Speaker of the House of Assembly, having been the Deputy Speaker. You have had some hot moments as well in the House. I remember you challenging former Speaker Jomo Thomas a few months ago. I think this might have been on one of the hot debates on one of the motions that the opposition party brought. And you stood out because I suppose you were very aggressive in your argument, and I almost conclude that it might have been a confrontation. But putting that aside, you appear to be, and you seem to be, as you said, very passionate about certain issues nationally and issues of development generally. How do you then explain your the fact that you and of course the newspapers have quoted you as saying that you would be a very impartial Speaker of the House, and thus far that seemed to be taking its course. But our political culture is one in which winner takes all. And therefore, what happens in the House, in some ways, is cosmetic. The party with the majority seats and so on always takes the better pie, a better side of the pie. And how do you, and I know we have a couple of months left in terms of the life of the Parliament, or the current Parliament, how do you in the next couple of weeks and months then to manage that process so that you stick to your commitment to this nation as an impartial Speaker of the House of Assembly?
But I think essentially you have answered the question. Because, my very first, following the elections as the Speaker, I made a very important point where I said it is my solemn duty to be very impartial, without fear or favor, to uphold the rules, the standing orders of the House. Yes. It's something I'm serious about. The historical records are not going to 10, 15, 20 years from now. Say that Carlos James sat in the seat as Speaker and had a partisan view in his deliberation as Speaker of the House. I intend to be very fair. I intend to, and as you said, continue to be impartial. And you mentioned Jomo. I now realize the hot seat that the Speaker shares, but Jomo essentially served well. I think he did service to in his very short time as Speaker as well. The important thing is to remain very level-headed, have a level of composure, and to try to understand the standing orders and how they're applied. I may have a particular view different from the lead of the opposition or the lead of government business, but as Speaker, you have to ensure that the standing orders, rules are applied and they're not in any way abused by either side of the House.
Okay.
And it's something that I do intend to ensure that we continue, even though we may at some point later it may get a bit more heated, and I'm predicting that.
Yes.
But across the board, I do intend to be fair, and that's something that I come committed.
Let me throw in this though, and suppose this is what I was getting at. Yes, and you did mention, as things heat up over the next couple of weeks, heading to a possible general election end of this year, constitutionally by March next year. You do bring a bias, a political bias, and I'm wondering whether or not at some point when the road gets rough, that bias may not kick in. And this is not to say that you cannot or one cannot be rational about and fair on matters, but biases and prejudices do step in when they mean or when they have to. So again, how do you respond to that?
So it brings me back to a point from a professor of media many years ago, Professor Brown, the paradigms of subjectivity and objectivity, and we're talking about the balance.
Yes.
And it's important that we, and in my role in particular, that as I said, the records are going to be there to say that Carlos James was fair. The sitting prior to the last sitting of the House, we had in fact, my first sitting as Speaker, a motion brought by the leader of the opposition on a matter of public importance.
Yes.
And the question was whether or not we are to hear that debate then. And from the moment the Honourable Prime Minister and members on the other side were in agreement that it is in fact a matter of public importance, which surrounded the issue of COVID and whether or not we close our borders. The rules of the standing orders, I'm guided by them.
Yes.
And once it is a matter which is of urgent public importance,
Yes.
it ought to be debated. And immediately I took some time to arrive at the decision, having a consensus. I wanted a consensus from both sides. I didn't want for me to rule and then you're saying that the government side is opposed here in the motion or the opposition side wants to have this. I said, let's arrive at a consensus on hearing this motion. And both sides agreed. They agreed that they will share the time that was allotted to the lead of the opposition, the Honourable Prime Minister, and I agreed to hear the motion. Now, some may say, well, it would have been easy for me to say, well, I don't think that this is a matter of public importance at the time, or even if it is in the powers of the Speaker, whether or not he wants to entertain the motion.
Yes.
And I could have said, let's move on to government business. I don't want to entertain this motion.
Yes.
And I rightly agreed, let us hear the motion. And,
Sure.
and that was perhaps one of the few occasions we've had the opposition bring in an impact. In fact, I think the very first time a motion of public importance in the House, the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, under my stewardship as Speaker. So the notion or the idea that there's a bias, I am guided by the rules, the standing order of the House, and I continue and I will continue to be guided by them.
Yes.
And that's essentially what it is.
Would you, if you have an opportunity to set some fundamental change in place in terms of reform of how we do business in the House, would you be a part of such undertaking? There is the argument, or concern rather, national concern, that the House has degenerated into a kind of a tit for tat, kind of a cosmetic undertaking of democratic processes. If you have the opportunity, would you get involved in serious reform regarding how we do business in the House?
It's a very important question, and it's a fair question.
Yeah.
But the part of the answer to that is, which parliament in the world you don't have these issues, or different ideologies and views and positions and certain things across the Commonwealth?
Yes.
It is the model and the system, the parliamentary system that we've inherited.
Yes.
Do we need some reform? I do think we need some reform. I think we can also start with even within the confines of the rules we have now, to be a bit more moderate and to temper ourselves. I do believe that is something that we can get a lot more done in the Parliament than the melodrama of who's right and who's wrong, and get to the people's business. But it is something that we've inherited, and with changing moods and mindsets. I mean, you'd find it hard to believe that there are a lot of people who enjoy that, the controversial characters of the Parliament, as opposed to someone who's very straightforward, simple, and move forward into the position that you say you're too soft as a member, and you need to be a bit more forward. But the reality is, we need to look at some transformation, not just in Parliament, but across the civil service, across the entire, our attitude towards development and our attitude towards advancement in Vincent and the Grenadines. The Honourable Prime Minister from time to time would speak of a post-colonial economy. And I always say we have a post-colonial economy, but we have inherited a colonial civil service. And not to berate civil servants, because we have some fantastic civil servants who give up their time and their energies to develop in St. Vincent. But we have to see some serious transformation in the way we do business in the public sector, in public sector reform, even you bring it out into business, as in the private sector as well. A bit more aggressiveness towards investment opportunities. There are persons would say there's no money in St. Vincent. There is money in St. Vincent. There's capital. But we have to see an aggressive attitude from the business sector in terms of driving the economy, investing, and putting resources into projects and so on from a private sector, and even public partnership. We need to see a lot more collaborative efforts where that's concerned, because our country, we make comparisons to other countries across the OECS or CARICOM or even other Commonwealth states. One of the uniqueness about St. Vincent, it's a multi-island state with a multiplicity of challenges and issues.
Yes.
And our recurrent expenditure is duplicated, it's duplicious from North Windward and North Leeward in the north, right down to the southern Grenadines. Everything that we put in every constituency has to be replicated across the demographics of St. Vincent. And it's not an easy country to manage. It's not an easy country to manage.
Taking you away a little bit from your role as Speaker of the House of Assembly, you do wear another hat, and which we'll talk substantially in a while from now. But do you agree that we need in this 21st century to do more? And I'm not just talking you, but in terms of us as a nation, political parties need to do more to sort of lift our women folk. I mean, when you look at our House of Assembly, it's almost disturbing that we only have a trickle of our women folk. And I know there are traditional fears and concerns about women in politics, but in an age such as this, it is almost disturbing that we don't have more women when we look at both sides, the government side and the opposition side in the House. I thought we had begun to see that a few years ago with persons, a few senators, Rachel Ford and Young, and later on persons like Zita and Frederick, and I know the system almost is a rotating system, and based on persons' inclination to run in a constituency or not, they may stay as senator or not. But yes, what's your thoughts on that in terms of our women folk and leadership at the highest level?
It's a fair point, and I think by and large the answer to that is rested in the question prior, which is the nature of our parliament, the aggressiveness of the combativeness of our parliament, and how the perception of being a soft parliamentarian to an aggressive one, and so on. So women tend to be a bit more modest, a bit more reserved in their approach to, and I'm not in any way saying that all women are like that, but the nature of politics in the Caribbean politics, even for a young male, a young professional, you would not want to get into politics. And that is part and parcel of the mindset that we have to change. We have to change the culture of our politics. The political divisiveness is one of the things. You'd hear a woman who would want to make a contribution and who would want to advance themselves, and she's this and she's that, and where she's going. I mean, but we have to lift our standard.
But do we as men, and I'm talking broadly now because I know not all men are like that, but do we as men, and particularly as we look at leadership, and if we look at St. Vincent, I think when you look across the civil service, I mean, yes, our women are doing well, but in terms of women wielding power and having the power in our churches, in our the corridors of power, so to speak, in the House of Assembly, the political party. It is true that we had a deputy prime minister who was a woman. But when you look really, is it that we are, as men, there's a certain culture and expectation that we almost by our actions, this is not for you. Do you get that sense, or is it changing?
I don't think that it is the men who are putting up a wall. I think essentially more women simply just need to come forward. And once more women bravely come forward, it really changes the mindset, especially for our young girls. They don't see role models in high positions. Now we have our first female Governor General, a young girl leaving the girls' high school or the Trumbull Secondary. Then you say, well, we have a female Governor General. You look across the civil service, we have a lot of women in leading positions. But generally across the board, not just in St. Vincent, it's not unique to St. Vincent, internationally. There's this conversation that while women are the driving force of a company, a private company, in the boardrooms, you're not seeing a lot of women making decisions or decision-making power. But we have some very strong women in St. Vincent, or Caribbean women in particular, who they have excelled, they have advanced themselves. I don't want us to have an idea that a woman should be elevated to a position just because she's a woman. But we should see women or all professionals coming forward. And if it happens to be a woman, then all, good for her, and it's good for St. Vincent and the Grenadines that we can have more women being elevated into positions of power, and that is important, especially for our young girls. But while you're on that topic, I am equally just as concerned for our young men.
Yes.
Who sometimes we tend to put a lot of focus on women, but at the same time, there are young men who are slipping through the social cracks. And it's one of the things that I'm very deeply concerned and passionate about, getting our young men trained and skilled, and women generally. In the next decade or two, women, they're natural born leaders. Our education system, we're pushing more women into universities. We're seeing more women in positions of power. And naturally, women are going to take this country over. I can see it happening.
Yes. You're viewing and listening to On the Spot. I'm your host, Ronnie Daniel, and my special guest is the Honorable Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mr. Carlos James. When we come back, we will take some more questions and we will talk about Carlos James, the politician. We'll be right back. Welcome back to On the Spot. I am your host, Ronnie Daniel, and with me this afternoon is the Honorable Carlos James, Speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we are talking about his, we got an insight into his school days, his professional life, and his work in the House as Speaker. And now we want to have a little chit chat about Carlos, the politician. I know this is a very sensitive issue. You're Speaker of the House, and we don't want to draw you into any unnecessary political squabbles. But you ran in 2015, and so that's the basis of our conversation. And you are in fact the hoping to be a Member of Parliament for North Leeward. And so I suppose one of the questions I have here for you, one of the persons, this person is from North Leeward in fact, and he wants to know whether or not the foundation has been laid for the economic development of North Leeward, and especially so after almost 20 years, the current administration has been in power, and essentially I think what he wants to know is whether or not after 20 years, what difference would you make with a party that is been in power for 20 years, and ideas are sort of running out, so to speak. So how would you respond to that? Has the platform for development been reached in North Leeward, and if so, what it is? If not, what difference do you intend to make in North Leeward?
It's a very important question, and I appreciate the contributor, the question that he has raised, or he or she has raised.
Yes.
You mentioned 20 years, but to start off, it is 20 years of a political party, if I may be somewhat drawn into the debate politically. It is 20 years of a party that has continuously refreshed and renewed its mandate and its policies and programs. Most of them social advancement programs. Our social economic development planners, they have put in place a framework that has captured the heart and soul of the government in terms of what they do, along the lines of dealing with the most vulnerable within our society. Now, to go to North Leeward, I recently, earlier this year, we had a constituency conference, and I spoke of the advancement we have made in a very short period of time as Carlos James, the caretaker for North Leeward, as the party's hopeful and caretaker for North Leeward. We have spent in that period of time a historic over $30 million in terms of infrastructure development and advancement. And a lot of it came off the heels of natural disasters. We're dealing with a post-colonial economy that has struggled through economic shocks of international nature. We're talking about 9/11, the 2008 housing bubble in the US, a plethora of issues, including climate change. And just a few years ago, we had, I believe in 2013, one nightfall of rain.
Draft system that.
We had about 15 to 18% of our GDP being wiped out. Overnight, literally. And these are some of the challenges that we have to face as a small state, vulnerable small state. North Leeward took a brunt of that. We had loss of lives, we had damage to infrastructure, bridges, road network was completely wiped out in some places. We have set about, and with me as the caretaker, I've said there are some things that I want to get done in North Leeward. The Cumberland Bridge, for instance, it's easy to put into quantum the infrastructure works. Cumberland Bridge alone was 13.5 million EC dollars. That's nearly half of the over 30 million on which I refer to. We had the resettlement of houses in Cumberland, in Fitzhugh, persons who were given free houses. They lost their homes in the disaster. Free houses. We have instances of damage to bridges, the road network. Right now in Chateaubriand, there's about 1.5 being spent to rehabilitate the Chateaubriand Bridge, and in the heart of the town. And you move around to Golden Grove, another embankment collapse. Between that is a 1.5 million project. The wharf in Chateaubriand was severely affected. 5 million is being put into have a brand new, not a refurbished, but a brand new wharf has to be built. The English and German gutter in Trumuka, $3.2 million. The road network leading from Belmont between Trumuka and Rosal to Coastal, that's another 6 million. The Belisle project, widening of the Belisle Road, that's another few million, I think 3 million thereabout. The numbers are there.
Yeah.
And we have set about to rebuild North Leeward after a natural disaster. But more importantly, you want to advance a constituency, but you have to put the infrastructure in place. I agree with the point that we have to put a lot of significant investment into North Leeward. And I will say this to you, I am a part of the idea of a new North Leeward. I want to work with every single constituent in North Leeward to rebuild North Leeward, starting with Chateaubriand. Because when we finished the Chateaubriand wharf, the jetty, and the bridge forward up the road, right in front of the wharf, I want to see an administrative complex, customs, banking, post office, the tongue board. That facility would serve as the administrative building that would function within the tongue itself. And we redevelop Chateaubriand into a tongue where a lot of us can be proud of. And that is what I want to see done. I cannot speak for anyone before my time, but I can tell you the future is very clear to me. My vision for North Leeward, with the people of North Leeward, in advancing and developing North Leeward.
I don't want to make light of what you've said, and I'm familiar with those works. But I think and again I'm going to broaden the question, they are essentially responses to changes, both climate, as you've quite rightly said, some of them are responses to changes, which we have no control really. No government has control over what nature does. But in terms of the general welfare and upliftment of people, which I know you are involved. I know you started a fantastic program sometime in 2014, just before your ascendancy into the political life. And I commend you on that, the ACEP program.
Access to College Education program.
Yes, a wonderful program. But I think what I hear people say when I listen to radio, when I look at Facebook, I think the general consensus is that the administration has responded to changes, but has not been proactive in advancing the general welfare of constituents in that area or that district. And I think that is what I hear people saying. So not discounting the fact that those are important works, but they are generally responding to catastrophe, to crisis.
Let me answer that question. Now, in order to advance and to put the framework, the developmental framework in place, you have to put the foundation, the infrastructure. And right now we're at that stage of infrastructure development. The new North Leeward I speak of.
You're doing it after 20 years.
The new North Leeward I speak of, well, the Carlos James
Yes.
and the new North Leeward I speak of,
Yes.
is the idea of a technical institute in Pitibadel.
Yes.
The Minister of Education spoke about it in the last budgetary estimates and his budget presentation. Do you know where the idea for that came from? I presented a proposal. I said, listen, 50% of the students at the Barry Technical Institute are from North Leeward, and there are still a lot more students trying to get into that facility. I said, I want to have a technical training facility, an institute in North Leeward. And we're hoping, I know with all of the challenges with COVID, but we're hoping to have that up hopefully this year, going into next year, we'll have a fully functioning technical institute. First, you have to train a lot of young persons, unemployed, school dropouts.
Right.
We have to deal with training, the technical aspect of it.
Right.
The fisheries complex in Chateaubriand, there are investors right now in dialogue to take over that project to rehabilitate the fisheries complex and to put in place not just a cold storage, but a packaging facility where we're going to export produce, seafood, right from Chateaubriand in the tongue there.
Yeah.
The agricultural depot, which is next to the fisheries complex. We're looking at having an agro-processing facility, and I'm hoping by this year we can have a start on that, the rehabilitative work, where we can train a lot of young persons in the micro and cottage enterprises. We can package. There's a big market for ginger, saffron, moringa, non-GMO sort of health well-being.
Yes.
There's a wellness revolution across the world.
Right.
There's a magnificent market for us to tap into.
Two more questions before
We are going to put that facility in place there.
Yes.
And across North Leeward, I'm going to rebuild a new North Leeward and fashion a new North Leeward that is going to be in the interest of the people.
Yes. Two questions before we take our next break. This is from another young person, a university student, in fact. How do you convince an undecided voter who believes the ULP government has run out of ideas and has become lackadaisical and complacent? However, this is a student also believes that the opposition party is a joke and is in no way, shape or form ready to manage the affairs of the country, since it is clear that they can't even manage the affairs of their party. How do you convince that person to vote for Carlos James, the caretaker, and the ULP? So that's one question. And then the other question somebody had on Facebook is about why in North Leeward the young tradesmen, and I would say women, let me get that question. I think the person was getting at, the comments are going fast, but the person wanted to know why is it there appears to be persons who are well qualified tradesmen and women, but they can't get jobs, and they're seeing other persons who are equally qualified, but the only difference is that their color is different, their association with the current administration. The usual question. So the first one is the university student wanted to know, how do you convince students who are saying ULP has run out of ideas and complacent, but also they are fearful, they see that the opposition is not ready, at least that's their view. And then they question about the trades, men and women.
So the first question is, as you know, Speaker of the House. I cannot necessarily speak party partisanship, but I see there's potential across the board in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There are young professionals who are coming involved in both political parties, but more so the Unity Labour Party. We are seeing a number of young professionals, Camilo, Saboto, Luke. They're doing fantastic work. A number of new exciting projects I'm seeing being established. In the next term, you are naturally going to see about capital investment. You have hotels, Holiday Inn, the Royal Mill, Marriott, Black Sands, possibly a Sandals. I'm not sure which one of the entities they're looking to negotiate Bookman Bay. But at least 5 major, at least 4 5-star hotels are going to be, and some smaller ones around St. Vincent. Approximately over the thousands of persons are going to be employed in the tourism sector. We have seen a new energy and push from Saboto as Minister of Agriculture and what he's doing and re-energizing the agricultural sector. What is interesting knowing, a lot of young persons are getting involved in agriculture now. And there's a drive. And we're talking about food security. We're talking about lowering our food import bill and providing an economy that is broad-based in St. Vincent, and a narrative, a post-colonial narrative which young persons can identify with in St. Vincent. I am seeing it. A lot of persons are seeing it. Some persons may not yet see what is ahead of us, but I'm telling you, the international airport has done a lot, and before the airport, and I'm going to be frank, you would have government today, government tomorrow, a change of government. A small rock called St. Vincent, no natural resource, no significant natural resource. Oil, bauxite, what we have, our greatest asset, our people, fundamentally, the skill sets of our people, our human resource capital. And we have sought to, and I'm speaking across the board here, we have sought to, over the last 2 decades, spent a significant level of advanced investment in our people. Universal access to primary and secondary education. We have seen, we are inheriting a St. Vincent and the Grenadines that following the slave trade and independence, only had 2 secondary schools, a boys and girls school. Now we have universal access to primary and secondary education across St. Vincent. More schools being built, more university graduates. Those graduates are coming home. Yes, we have to invest. We have to look at creating a culture that can accept young entrepreneurs. And we talk about the hot topic now, which is Prime. A magnificent idea that we can see a lot of young professionals are getting involved, getting access, not a loan, because some of them have student loans as well, not a loan, but a grant. And there are some persons who are wondering whether a grant is, you have to pay it back. Or, no, I said grant funding is simply what it is. It's free money. You put together your idea and your business plan. We say, here's some money. We want to invest in you and invest in your idea. And naturally, we see that even members of the opposition are in support of Prime. They say it's a fantastic idea. And I'm happy to see young persons taking advantage of that. Now, the next question had to do with North Leeward and tradesmen and skilled men and women.
Yeah.
We have a number of projects in North Leeward, and there are persons, I don't want to go into name calling, but I know there are persons who are on projects who were not supportive of the current administration. I know there are skilled persons, and I value skill and I value trade. Recently, I went into Rosal and I told the young persons in Rosal, I want to build a hard court for them. We started a hard court. Not one person, young person was able to bend steel in Rosal. We had to bring in a steel bender from Chateauvillet. And I started training young persons in Rosal to bend steel. Because in the construction sector, it is a skill set within the sector itself. But generally, we are rebuilding North Leeward from infrastructural damage and so on. But I want to see, and I keep repeating this point, in New North Leeward, where an environment for businesses to flourish, investment in infrastructure development and advancement of our people, and education at the center of the driving force of that. The new technical institute I spoke of at Petit Bodel, vocational training, technical training. Another administrative center is going to be at Trumuka, where we want to put in one facility to house Braxter, the local post office and the village council. But on the ground floor of that is also an annex to the Technical Institute at Petit Bodel, because I want every single young man and woman in North Leeward to be trained, whether in academia or vocational training, because we have to provide the training and then provide the employment or the environment or the opportunities for them to advance themselves. And we're doing that. By and large, from a social front, And when I say I talk about the collective, the country as a whole, this country has done a lot in terms of social programs for the elderly, for the most vulnerable. And I don't need to expound on that because persons are seeing day by day the improvements in the lives of our elderly, improvements in higher payout in terms of the public assistance, the Lives to Live program where we put on bathrooms and make their lives a bit more comfortable. I just recently in Vincypowa, and we speak of Vincypowa a lot here, put on a bathroom, and this is outside of the Lives to Live program. You know, this is Carlos James and a few young skilled tradesmen in Vincypowa. We put a bathroom on for a 91-year-old lady. And we're making the lives of our elderly more comfortable. So we're addressing the issues of the youth, we're dealing with the elderly, and in the middle, the professionals, we're creating the opportunity for investment and job opportunities and wealth creation. These are the things that I am passionate about. These are the things that I want to see, not just in North Leeward, but in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And it is the right moment and the opportune time for us to say, let us get together. Let us move from an idea of a red versus a yellow. Let us move from an idea of a partisan view and let us come together as a people to advance this country because St. Vincent needs that togetherness now more than ever in this critical time in our history.
I agree with you and I'm responding, and this is not me, I'm responding to some of the comments. I remember distinctly in 2001 when Dr. Gonsalves, our Prime Minister, had fashioned or had articulated the idea of a St. Vincent that is together, and so he coined the word together now. I remember distinctly reading and listening to persons in his own party chastising the Prime Minister for that. And whether the Prime Minister was joining or not, that's for us to decide. But I remember persons within the bowels of the party saying, you know, behave yourself, sort of, you know, using my own terms. I hear you saying the same thing. It's ideal, and I wish we could do that. But how do we plan to do that when by nature our political culture is divisive? And that is not to say that it can't change, and I believe that we could change things by our actions and so on. I put it back to you. How do you, if you become, or should I put it, whether or not you become the next Member of Parliament for North Leeward, would you willing to continue to advocate and to advance an agenda of, and I don't want to say together now, but of unity in St. Vincent, because I hear it strongly from the beginning to end, and I think it is novel, it is ideal, but the system is just broken, and it's toxic, and you might be going against the general view of your party, and not necessarily party, but the soldiers, so to speak, quote unquote. How do you plan to deal with that, and especially if you become the next MP?
No, you
difficult.
said if, but some persons may correct you and say when.
Well, I'm being cautious.
But, on the lighter side of things, but more seriously,
yes.
I have this idea, this notion, this vision, that if it is that I am going to be on a ticket in the next general elections, and I have to make that determination on varying issues of you have to be on red and you have to be in this. That's not the type of politics I represent. That's not me. It is not in me. It's not what I'm about. When I go to North Leeward, a place that I traverse weekly, daily, homes of persons who I love dearly, I don't see red. I don't see yellow. I see people. And foremost in my vision for a new North Leeward is a people-centered developmental narrative. You cannot tell me you want to develop a St. Vincent and the Grenadines or a constituency and you're focusing on a divisive kind of approach. Because you will say, yes, it's maybe a few fractions within the ULP may have a particular view, which fanatics, persons on the outskirts, not necessarily a party policy position. But that is not to say that it is not the same thing on the other side. Because as much as you may hear the rhetoric of together, there are persons in the shadows on the other side who naturally have that same view.
Yeah.
And Ron, it takes you, it takes me, it takes all Vincentians to cut that out of our body politic. And it's something that I am passionate about and I'm serious about. We cannot advance as a country unless we put aside the political divisiveness. My idea for North Leeward is a North Leeward where I focus on people and the advancement of our people. I don't want to hear who is voting who and who's voting what. I went into a particular area in North Leeward recently, and someone said to me, well, if you help me with this, I will scratch your back. And I stopped the person in the middle of the conversation. I said, listen to me. If you need the help and you genuinely need the help, I am going to help you. I don't want to hear you're scratching my back and I scratch your back. I am here to help the people of the constituency. Whether or not you are in support of me or you supported me in 2015. And if you go across North Leeward, there are persons who will tell you that, who are of the other political persuasion. They will tell you that I come to their homes and I offer myself to them in service to them and to the service to the constituency. And naturally, leadership across not just a constituency level, but a national level, we have to take that same view.
Yes.
We have to break the cycle. Just as we have to break the glass ceiling with women in politics, we have to break this divisiveness. We have, on both sides of the political aisle, we have to put our feet down and say, we are young, passionate persons who want to serve our country, but we cannot continue in the same mode of operation as the 80s and the 70s, and where you had persons losing eyes and so on from motorcades and neighbors not speaking to neighbors, family not speaking. Listen,
Yeah.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a special place. It's a place I love. It's your country, it's my country. It is our country. And we have to work together for a better St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Okay. You're listening to this edition of On the Spot. I'm your host, Ronnie Dan, and my special guest is the Honorable Carlos James. He is the Speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent. We'll take another break, and when we come back, we'll wrap up our edition for today. We'll take our final break. I am your host, Ronnie Daniel, and with me is the Honorable Carlos James, Speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we are getting an insight into his life as a schoolboy, as a professional, as Speaker of the House and Senator, politician. Carlos, we are into our final segment, and I suppose one of the things that, well, when we went out the last segment, we were talking about the question of unity and the sort of a political culture that we have inherited, and so to speak, we have, in my mind and in the minds of many, we have not really fundamentally tried to improve. We have done some constitutional changes here and there, but in fact, this post-independence period also mirrors the pre-independence period, say from the 1951 when we got adult suffrage to the 70s. So in a sense, one could argue that we have not really, we have improved as a society. There's no question about that. Our politicians, our technocrats, we have done some good work in St. Vincent. All the administrations have built on foundations and have done some unique things. One of the things we have not done is, and I want to stick with the question of unity, the question of building a society that we want, and I hear it coming through from you, both parties or parties in the past have articulated some sort of a vision where they want to take the country. Unfortunately, we have not, in my mind, done sufficient to reach there. Together now, a kinder and gentle society. Dr. Gonsalves' post-colonial and many-sided society that is once local, regional. We've had these, so these are sort of ideal, and they sort of point to the fact that we want to get somewhere as a society, but we are not just there yet. How, again, how are we going to do that? I know you have articulated your own vision, but sometimes the vision of the MP is sort of stifled by the vision of the whole party. How do we, and perhaps we could speak broadly here now, how do we as a society move towards the society that we need, and with unity of purpose and strength being the center of that society that we need to build for our children and grandchildren to come? Is it too far-fetched, I think? I want to hear you on that.
Certainly not. One of the things, and you being a student of history as well, Donnie, Ronnie, you will understand that we are a developing democracy. As long as St. Vincent has had independence since 1979, it is still very much in its maturing stage as a country and as a society. We have had significant advancements, the Black Power Days, and rules, and a few other persons, limo, and we've gone past that. We are now in an era of technological advancement and social transformation and education, building a human resource wealth that we can draw on, and these are the things that we from time to time gradually you build paths of a growing democracy. We're talking about reforms in our civil service. This is another area which we have to look at. We are talking about broadening the independence of the judiciary in a fully functioning way, which we have done by and large. The arms of government, they have strengthened the capacity to function. All of these things in just a mere few years. 1979 is just there. So a lot of advancement has taken place, but the answer to the question is that collectively we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of work to do. We must never relent. We must never become complacent in our quest for advancement and development as a society. Do not let us be sidetracked by the partisan nature of our body politic. Let us focus on a collaborative approach across civil society, the government, the working groups, the labor movement. We have to re-energize the base, re-engineer a new St. Vincent. And naturally this will take place over time. We have seen the advancement under ULP administration, but transformation into a new period in the next 20 years, we have to look beyond now and setting the framework and the foundation for us to advance to that level of development which we so badly need in St. Vincent.
Let me ask you again. I'm responding to comments. Let me ask you, because somebody just mentioned that the facts and figures don't necessarily match what you're saying. But I in terms of the current administration, which you have a significant role to play, the administration under the state, I should say, in the last 20 years has sort of stifled or curtailed, so to speak, some freedoms. And critically, you mentioned the fact that we are a maturing democracy, and if indeed we are to advance to where we see ourselves as an ideal society, do you believe the state has to simmer? And when I say that, I mean in the last 5 years or so, I could probably count on my hand the number of cases that the state has lost in terms of its attempt to curtail freedoms of individuals and organizations. How do you build a society when the state is of course, we know in any civilization, the state has extraordinary powers, and it has to balance the use of that power while trying to advance freedoms. And unfortunately, the state, in this current scheme of things, the pass mark has perhaps been a C+. How do you respond to that, and how do you plan to change that? If you, again, and not if, because you already have a critical role to play in the scheme of things. How do you plan to change that? And again, I'm responding to some issues.
Right. It's a very important point, and I think largely you have answered the question, because we speak of a growing democracy.
Yes.
And we speak of the independence of the judiciary and the strengthening of all the arms of government and so on. And the mere fact that you mentioned that quite a few cases have gone to the court, you're now speaking about the administration of justice.
Yes.
And the important thing is that persons can, there's a channel that persons can seek remedy.
Yes.
And it is not a dictatorship. It is not a communistic type of view. It is, you have the independence of the judiciary, the administrative arm of justice that can provide remedies for persons. That in itself is a growing and emerging democracy. It speaks volumes to St. Vincent as a democratic state. Okay. But to go more fundamentally to the question, in the sense that, again, we have a civil service that functions. And sometimes a lot of politicians are put to the front, and ministers are put to the front of but by and large, we have to look at several reforms. We have to look at how we clean up, how we do business, how we do things in St. Vincent from an administrative standpoint. And I say this with all sincerity, you know, without any malice about any policy position regarding anyone. We have to, but you have answered the question. We have a democratic system that works. And if you feel that you have been aggrieved or there's an issue, there's the arm of government, there's the judiciary where you can ventilate that case. And the mere fact that, as you mentioned, some of these cases have gone against the administration and the government is a clear indication of the independence of the judiciary, a growing and functioning democracy where all the functioning arms of the government are working. And that's a fantastic thing. Okay. But we, as I said, we have to move, we have to advance St. Vincent. We have a long way to go, but we are making strides and we're leaping into a new frontier, a new St. Vincent, shaping and building and molding a St. Vincent that we inherited in 1979, October 27th, to a St. Vincent where we are now and a St. Vincent where we want to go.
Before we go, I can't leave without, make you leave without asking you, why do you think you are the best candidate? You are coming up against someone who has experience and been, this is the third, he's been there since 2005. But he's had some experience representing the North Leeward community. And why do you think you are the better candidate? Yes.
Well, when you say experience in what capacity? Experience in representing.
Well, electorally, he's won the last three.
He has won the last two elections. He's a second term.
Yes.
He's a second term MP, but that doesn't mean he's the most experienced for the role. And without saying anything against the good brother, and I have nothing but respect for him as a human being. I think North Leeward needs a lot more in terms of the quality of representation that it so badly needs at this point in terms of leadership. I think St. Vincent needs a lot more. I think by and large, we need more persons like Carlos James in North Leeward and in St. Vincent. We need more persons, and I don't want to be politically biased, to say Camilo, Soboto, Luke, and maybe I will trade maybe a Leacock. I don't know, but the point is, we're all called to service. We're all giving of our energies and efforts to this process. You outlined my credentials at the start of the program. There's no doubt in the minds of people of North Leeward that I'm suited for the task ahead. In 2015, someone told me just recently, North Leeward would usually give their MPs a nice baptism. Your first dip is, you have to sit out of 5 years. You don't come and suddenly just win. What gives you that right? You have to go and prove yourself to the people. And I think in the last 5 years, I've put in place a very compelling argument to be elected as the next duly representative for the constituency. I don't see a comparison. I don't like to draw on a comparison between me and the current MP. I don't want to go down that partisan road.
Yes.
He has his qualities.
Yes.
I have my qualities. I bring certain different variant skill sets to the political process. Maybe he does. I mean, some will debate on that. But the point is, I think my battle into 2020, going into an election year perhaps, is going to be Carlos James versus the hearts and the minds of the people. Convincing them that this is the right move. This is the man of your time and for you. A man who sees past the partisan nature of our politics, who sees people rather than red or yellow. And I think that is fundamentally my challenge. I don't think there's really a challenge if, in the combative nature of our politics. There's not going to be a versus he said, or whatever. I am focusing on people and the advancement of people and their development. And I'm here to serve, and I'm here to in whatever capacity the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines may think I'm more suited.
Yes, okay. This has been another edition of On the Spot. My special guest this afternoon has been the Honorable Carlos James, Speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we got an insight into his formative years, Carlos James, the professional, and of course, Carlos James, the Senator / the Speaker of the House of Assembly / politician. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your comments and your questions. And we want to say a special thanks to our sponsors, ANN News Network, ITFX Solutions, and Chill Spot. And of course, we thank our technicians, our cameramen, and of course, we thank our sponsors for the refreshments. Tune in next week when we hope to interview Member of Parliament for Central Kingstown, the Honourable Sinclair Leacock. Do join us next.